I think my grandma has this dress.
No, neither.
I feel like Harry Potter. Too librarian. Too Bono?
No.
No. No. Big no.
Yes.
I look a little bit like a bumblebee. How long you been in these parts?
Blah. If sadness had a color. I bought this? Your Honor, I object.
No. This is so much like my dad.
That is the ticket.
Support for KQED Live comes from Berkeley Rep and the San Francisco Symphony.
Disproportionate impact of
more than half of Black business owners.
And disproportionate.
Somehow we always find a way to rise.
To the blueprint builders, to the backbones of every block, for the curators of the culture, and for generations to follow. You might fall, but never fail. Keep rising, keep rising, keep rising. Apply for business, marketing, and tech makeovers on us.
각각 집에 다 모였으면 1차, 2차, 단 3차 끝에 행군을 합신다. 생길째 국태민난 장가의 자시고 지가의 축하시고 인거에 인나하시니 전지가 열려옴늘 싸울쓰구나 여루사 사지에서 산신의 품으로 드리라 이 산 속에 심장님 칼도 있구나 그 무드 전 이야기 그 시들을 찾으라 이 강로를 가면 유화 부인을 찾으라 여루상사 뒤에요 여보시여 농부님네 이내 한 말 들어보소요 농부님네 내 말 한번 들어보소 모를 심소를 쓰구나 여루 상사 뒤에요 사랑 당신의 이 나무에 만나서 가품과 외로움 지친 마음에 이 농부의 이야기 이 시를 넘으러 이 길도 내 누나 이 아픔도 내려나고 이 실수야 간다 간다을 쓰거나 여루 상사 뒤에 (7월이 8월 3, 9월 4, 10월) 오동지 육서달 내내 돌아가더라도 1년하고도 12달 만복은 백성에게 잡시는 모랄로 만대위전을 비옵니다. 어루애기야 어루애기야 어기영차의 기로구나. 정월 2월에 드는 액은 3월 4월에 맞고 3월 4월에 드는 액은 5월 단오에 담아가낸다. 어루애기야 어루애기야 어기영차의 기로구나. 5월 6월에 드는 액은 7월 8월에 맞고 7월 8월에 드는 액은 9월 길에 담아가낸다. 어루애기야 어루애기야 어기영차의 기로구나. 9월 길에 드는 액은 10월 모날에 맞고 10월 모날에 드는 액은 동지 섣달에 담아가낸다. 어루애기야 어루애기야 어기영차의 기로구나. 애기로구나. 대명천지 밝은 옛 하늘 땅에도 만복을 주옵소서 세구나.
Wow, what a way to begin an event. Dohee Lee and Jaeun-jun are queer Korean descendants living on Huchun, Ohlone unceded land. Thank you so much for that amazing performance. Good evening, everyone. My name is Giselle Chow, and I'm a member of KQED's Community Advisory Panel. We are a group of community members that supports KQED in community building. Learn more about our work at kqed.org/CAP. I want to begin this evening by acknowledging that KQED headquarters are located on Ramaytush Ohlone land. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on this occupied land, and that we owe a collective debt to its original stewards. If we bring value to your everyday life, I encourage you to consider becoming a KQED member. You can find out more at kqed.org/donate. For those of you joining us for the first time, KQED is Northern California's PBS NPR member station. KQED Live is our new multi-platform events program that produces screenings, talks, performances, and food tastings based on KQED's mission to inform, inspire, and involve. You can learn more at kqed.org/live. We want to thank the season sponsors that make KQED Live possible: Asian Art Museum, Berkeley Rep, Comcast Business, and the San Francisco Symphony. We are so grateful for their commitment to supporting our mission of civic and cultural engagement in the Bay Area. A big shout out to Center for Asian American Media, who is our partner on this event, and promotion partners Slow Food East Bay and Foodwise. So now let's welcome Thuy Tran, Director of Festival and Exhibitions at CAAMFest, to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Soy Story, a special collaboration between CAAMFest and KQED. My name is Thuy Tran. I'm the Festival and Exhibitions Director of CAAMFest. For those who might not be familiar, CAAMFest is one of the largest festivals highlighting Asian American talent in film, food, and music, and ideas. We're so honored to highlight the work of second-generation seeds tonight. But before we start, I'd like to take this time to thank a few folks. None of this would be possible without our hardworking team of staff, board members, as well as volunteers, as well as our amazing partners, such as KQED. And special thanks to Yoan and Marky, as well as their tech team and the front of house team for really hosting and taking care of us tonight. They've been wonderful to work with. And of course, a bundle of gratitude to our farmers, artists, and chefs who have nurtured the kinship between seeds and humanity. Kristyn Leach, Chef Steve Joo, Aileen Suzara, QT Việt Cafe, and Dohee Lee and Jaeun-jun for beautifully grounding us in this musical ritual. It's a farmer's labor song and a prayer song that blesses the land, seeds, nature, and humanity. And of course, we want to thank you, all of you, for answering the call to gather to celebrate our creative communities. This event is only one of over 55 programs, so I encourage you to check out our lineup at caamfest.com. This coming weekend will be the last of the festival. Until next year. Tonight, we celebrate soybeans and seeds with second-generation seeds and the community they've cultivated. I have such deep respect and admiration for Kristyn's seed-saving work. By preserving, adapting, and breeding beloved crops, we affirm that culture is rooted in our imaginations, not just our memories. And while Kristyn grows many Asian crops and is building out an expansive seed library, today we'll be focusing on soybeans and unpacking the complex layers of this humble bean through tastings and storytelling. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you our host for the evening, Cecilia Lei. Cecilia is a host. One sec, we'll get there. Cecilia is a host and producer of Fifth and mission, the Chronicle's flagship daily news podcast. Her past coverage includes stories on race, immigration, criminal justice, as well as the Bay Area Asian American community. Her work has appeared on Vox Media, KQED, and NPR. She is also the former president of the SF Bay Area chapter of the Asian American Journalists Association. Please welcome me in welcoming Cecilia, or join me in welcoming Cecilia Lei to the stage.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. How's everyone feeling? Good, good. Well, happy API Heritage Month. Happy CAAMFest. I always look forward to CAAMFest because it's a time to celebrate storytelling, especially from Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. And tonight's special because we're doing that through the lens of food. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists. But before that, I want to introduce a video that was produced by the team at KQED Live that gives you a little backstory of two of the panelists that you'll just meet in just a moment. So let's watch that video.
For me, starting my own farm was mostly just a process of like my own learning and curiosity about how much we could just try to farm in a way that was more in sync with our ecosystem and kind of more respectful. So that's, yeah, all of our farm is focused on that, to try to integrate in our ecosystem and, try to be as closed loop as possible. Farming is connected to my heritage now just because when I started the farm, it was out of a curiosity both to explore farming practices from Korea, because I felt like I had spent so much time in this organic vegetable world, but it was so homogenous in a way, and the stories we were hearing were very homogenous, and it felt like there's both like active erasure of different communities' contributions to the food system, and then there's also just sort of like people who never bothered to learn about it and don't know what they're missing. So I think I just felt curious about, knowing that there was this strong peasant movement in Korea through the 90s when I was an adolescent, and learning about that and just trying to merge those things together, I think, as a Korean American. Farming for me feels like something optimistic in terms of just trying to be, especially natural farming, where you're just trying to be like a good citizen, like on the land where you're at, and not just treat it like a blank slate that you're just trying to extract as much resources from. And so I like sort of the gentleness, I think, of this farming method that's just not about a lot of prescriptive methods, but it's just saying like you have to care about like who exactly is living in this ecosystem.
My name is Steve Joo. My restaurant is Joodooboo in Oaklands. We're gonna char some little leaves of little gem lettuces. This is the machine I imported from Korea. It helps with two of the main processes of dooboo production. The first one is grinding the soybeans. You can see that the grinding mechanisms are made of ceramic stone, and then it sort of mimics traditional mortar grinder that they would use. So soaked soybeans go into the hopper, and then the pulp gets shot out through this chute here. And then on this side, the soy milk is shot into this cauldron. Once that process is done, we extract the soy milk from this pipe chute here, and then it gets cooled, coagulated, curdled, molded, and that's the dooboo. There's something, for me, kind of alluring about the charred, smoky aspect of grilling certain types of greens. It stemmed from the idea of kind of deconstructing Korean barbecue a little bit, Korean dipping sauce that is then had with meat, grilled meats. So this preparation paired with fresh dooboo is just like a fun contrast of textures and flavors.
Give it up to the KQED Live team for creating that wonderful video. And now I'll introduce you to our panelists, starting with Steve Joo, who you just saw in that video. He's the chef owner of Oakland's Joodooboo. If you haven't been there yet, you should. It's wonderful, beautiful restaurant. He makes fresh tofu or dooboo every day, among other things. He was born in Houston, Texas, lived in a number of places from South Carolina to Seoul, Korea. He graduated from Oberlin College in 2004 and has been cooking professionally ever since. And he's been in the Bay Area since 2007. Everyone give it up for Steve. Our next panelist is Aileen Suzara, who is a food justice advocate and educator. Her project, Sariwa, celebrates ancestrally inspired relationships to food. She has collaborated with schools, organizations, and projects including Rooted Recipes, Sama Sama Cooperative. Aileen is an alumni of UC Berkeley's School of Public Health and is currently working to support the return of resources to food and land initiatives. Everyone, welcome Aileen. And last but not least, Kristyn Leach is a Northern California farmer who's dedicated to preserving rare and endangered heritage seeds. You're going to hear all about her work. She runs the organic farm, Namu Farm, in partnership with the restaurant group Namu Gaji in San Francisco. She's also the founder of Second Generation Seeds, a California farmer collective and seed company. Kristyn's also the subject of a PBS short doc. I have to mention it since we're at KQED. It's called The Seed Saver. Everyone, welcome our panelists. So it's a unique conversation, right? We're focusing on a soybean, which is like, why are we doing that? We're going to get into why. But first, I thought I'd start off by just, soy has been a part of my life, as I'm sure it has been for many of you. Love the excitement. Yes. For many people of Asian descent, like I grew up with tofu in my mom's stir fries, in her soups. I drank soy milk for breakfast almost every morning. So I wanted to start the conversation just by asking the three of you, what kind of role did soy play in each of your lives? Maybe Kristyn, we'll start with you.
Well, growing up in an Irish Catholic family on Long Island, I will say soy was not a robust member of my household. But I stopped eating meat when I was an adolescent, and then I was left to fend for myself, and I was like, well, I guess I eat this now, because that was seemingly the option being told to me. So,
What about you, Aileen?
I feel like I'm flanked by soy celebrities right now. As a Filipino American, my parents were the first generation to migrate. We actually didn't have a lot of soy growing up, other than ever ubiquitous soy sauce. And my parents would have these really fond memories of eating taho, which is like a soft custardy tofu with the brown sugar syrup. Back in the Philippines, that was harder to find in the US. But I think moving ahead, I had two other chapters. One was when our family moved to Hawaii. Suddenly there was this mixed plate effect of eating foods that represented various parts of Asia Pacific diaspora cuisines, and soy foods were everywhere. And it wasn't until moving to the Bay as an adult and living in communes, I was like, oh, there's this whole other genre of hippie soy food that I didn't even know existed, because I had always had it from the lens of mostly Asian American cuisines. So yeah, and now I'm in a household where we're eating everything soy, and my daughter has never had milk or cow milk.
Okay. Now, Steve, obviously you've made a career out of soy, but before you did that, what was soy like for you?
I think growing up in a Korean home, the first thing that comes to mind is just the smell of doenjangguk or doenjangjigae. Even though I didn't really like it, it's one of my favorite things now. But I don't think I really liked it particularly when I was a kid. There's just something, but the sort of the characteristics, the quality of the smell of that soup or stew at home. It's just so rich, unctuous, penetrating. I feel like it's basically kind of part of my DNA, part of my bones. So that's, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Now, soy is the backbone of so many East Asian cuisines, and it had such a journey to come to North America, to come to the US. Let's really sort of understand the origins of soy with you, Kristyn. It was cultivated in China thousands of years ago. It grew wild in parts of Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Fast forward to today, soy has become synonymous with healthy eating, meat alternatives. We'll get into those narratives later, but take us back to the origins of the soybean. How was it used and consumed in its earliest varieties?
Yeah, I wish we had like some cool, like shimmery special effect to rewind thousands of years. But yeah, I mean, I think that it felt really easy to think about designing a whole program around soy just because it is so foundational to so many cultures. And there's a really good reason, which is just that it really exemplifies kind of like the beauty of the sort of co-domestication process between humans and plants. And so I think when I think of just something that comprises like a core of a place and a people in terms of just like shaping culture along with biodiversity, like I think soy is such a good mascot for that. And so if you think about places like Korea where it's not only been cultivated for centuries, but it's also just like still growing semi-wild, there's so much, you know, just genetic diversity. But you also just see the imprint, like all these beans evolving in relationship to like what they were sensing and responding to in terms of their environment and climatic conditions. And then just thinking about like us intervening in this massive way in terms of artificial selection. So I think it's just, yeah, it speaks to kind of like the beauty of those relationships. Like I think sometimes we end up in this narrative where plant breeding is seen as like a really top-down and sort of like a system of control, where if you look at so much of like the beauty of these relationships is in that sort of like dance back and forth of how we left an imprint that's really discernible in each other's, you know, in our makeup.
Aileen, your work as an educator and a cook who works with communities of color to promote health and healing through food, why is understanding the heritage of crops like soy really important from a cultural standpoint?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I do want to bring up something that Kristyn just brought up. You mentioned soy as a shaper of culture. And I think what's so important, whether we're talking about soy or, you know, think of another heritage crop, bitter melon or moringa or malunggay, any number of crops. I think sometimes in this, the context that we are in, you know, living in the US and in kind of reductive Western way of looking at foods, culture, heritage, roots, and the connection from the spirit level to just community meaning can sometimes be so fragmented from these crops. And I think when we are really looking at the kind of roadmap or DNA of foods as a way to thread together health for our human selves and for, you know, the ecological world we're in, we need to have that reconnection to heritage. And I think, you know, we often might hear some framing in like white wellness spaces, I think in the US, about these foods is new. And it's so important to really recognize that soy and other crops have centuries or thousands of years of history behind them.
And Steve, we're talking here because, you know, Asian culture and food is inextricably linked. And as the owner chef of Joodooboo, where you make small batch tofu, you guys, this tofu is incredible. You'll get a chance to try this later this evening. How often are you thinking about the origins of the ingredients that you incorporate into your dishes?
Yeah, I think most of those thoughts come probably in conversation with Kristyn more than anything else. I think I had a certain approach to this particular expression of Korean American food, where I was trying to gain some understanding of essentially what like a Korean grandma would do if they were transplanted to California and given a set of Californian ingredients. What would a Korean grandma do with a tomato, for example? So there's like a certain, I guess, origin of spirit that I'm always trying to chase, but that inevitably brings us to the conversation of, oh, what are the tools that this grandma would have, you know, wished to have in her pocket?
What's the opportunity by incorporating a very California sensibility to Korean traditional dishes?
The opportunity is just getting to make the most of what's growing abundantly where we're at. and the chance to discover new and unexpected things like making kimchi out of tomatoes or things like seltis or just any of the really beautiful produce that we get to see grown around us.
And because like soy is such a staple, how did you decide to focus on it? And what was sort of your approach when you were thinking about your craft?
A few years ago, back in 2014, I went to Korea to learn more about Korean food specifically. And one of my great aunts, aunties, kind of told me that really delicious food, at least in the context of talking about Korean food, is not salty. And then she would say this, and I'd be like, oh. And then not fully understanding what she was trying to say. But part of that understanding was Korean food wouldn't exist without the sauces, the soy sauces, the doenjang, the fermented soybean paste, or the gochujang, which also incorporates soy into it. And then when you find well-crafted versions of those sauces and they're incorporated well into food, at least according to her interpretation, they do a thing where they bring depth and complexity and highlight the flavor of the ingredients that you're using them with, but then they don't overpower, they don't stand in front of all those things. And so there is, I guess, like a certain seasoning principle and like the way that it brings depth, complexity without, but in sort of like a supportive role almost, where they highlight the ingredients that you're using them with. That's sort of the philosophy, I think, of the food.
Yeah. And I know that you all know each other. You're all friends. And
yeah, it's like, Una should call you not Uncle Steve, but maybe Halmoni Steve now. I think she'll do it. She'll be a little confused.
But I bring that up because I know you've tried Steve's food and seeing what he's doing with soy. What was sort of striking to both of you about what his approach is?
I mean, I can't answer it without like such a deep bias because I just love Steve so much.
Okay.
And,
that's okay. Clearly I have it too. So.
Yeah, I mean, we traveled to Korea together, and so we were like with our friend Sarah, and we were all hearing these stories just together. And so I think it was just such a rich experience. And then I think, for him to see it reflected, and then the things I brought back into the field, and then I felt like it was so immediately reflected in terms of just like the thoughtfulness he brought to the food. Like I feel like it's hard to even parse out or compartmentalize any of those feelings at this point because it feels so like well integrated, and seeing like him bring like his dream to life with Joodooboo.
And yeah, I think if I can share just a reflection on Steve things, I think the first time I had your food was probably, I associate the flavor so strongly actually with Kristyn and the farm and just past years of Chuseok and that's harvest festivals. And I think for me, as someone who's like newer to knowing you, but also just so appreciative of like the gifts, it's just kind of the weaving together of these really place-based seeds and then this like deep sensibility that shows through in the food. So I think that the integration to me comes through so beautifully.
And it becomes the best version of itself, because I would say the same thing of like, I don't think I understood bitter melon until I met you. Like I had it and I could hear other people's appreciation, but then it was like the closeness that we developed, and then seeing it just through your eyes was like, oh, you're like this accidental ambassador, like the bitter melon lobbyist of California, basically.
We could do a whole show on bitter melon. I feel like there's a lot to say about bitter melon.
Oh, yes. I mean, Aileen has hosted that show for Seed Stewards with your dad.
That's true. Kristyn, we're going to get the hook pulled off because we have to go back to soy now. But yes, we can totally.
Well, going back to soy, Kristyn, I wanted to discuss more your work with Second Generation Seeds. It's a seed company, if you're not familiar with it. And the mission of the company, among other things, is to preserve heritage seeds and to quite literally place power back into the hands of small-scale farmers. How does soy, for example, demonstrate the importance of that work?
Well, I can share that when I started the farm in 2011 or 12, I remember I just went through the Kitazawa catalog, which, like up until a couple years ago was the oldest Japanese American owned seed company. It's over a century old. And I just went through and I like circled everything that said it was Korean. So, oh, Korean radish, that's great. Korean this, Korean that. And so there was a Korean soybean. I was like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm going to grow like the Korean soybean. And then I think when we went to Korea, I just had felt so naive. Like I looked around, I was meeting all these farmers that had like a soybean for doenjang, a soybean for soy milk, a soybean for dubu. And each one, it was like so particular and it was like regional, but it was even from household to household. And I just felt like, wow, I didn't realize how curated my experience was as a farmer of something seen as like upstream and somewhat opaque, of like who's even dictating what I have a choice to grow. And what are all the sort of overlapping kind of bigger global geopolitical forces that shape that. And then I think when you think of soy too, like it's so maligned. I think people just like have a response one way or another. It's not like people are just like, soy, what's that? Like I think there's always a feeling. And I think it's just, those stand in such stark contrast. Like the stories I got to hear only by going to Korea and like getting to the root of Soy's story. And I will say, like the USDA spent like a considerable amount of money in its early days, like bringing soy from East Asia. So they collected over 7,000 varieties of soybeans and put it into breeding programs in like this continent. And the entire gene pool of soy in less than a century, like essentially took away over 3/4 of like the unique genetic traits. So I think it's just what we think about with second generation seeds is like, we have these notions of banking seeds and preserving biodiversity, but if we never address the inequities of like who is stewarding that, who has the economic, means to be doing all of this farming, growing food, that it doesn't matter how many seeds we bury under an iceberg, like because there's going to be a narrow point of view of like who decides like what's delicious, what's beautiful, what's useful about it. And there's a gatekeeping to that. And we wanted to just blow that wide open and restore everything to just, understanding each bean for who exactly they are.
Yeah, like that. Talking about this sort of narrowing down of what we understand about the soybean, like you said, there's a lot of narratives about soy. And Aileen, I know you've said in the past, when you control seeds, you control food. And it can also be argued that when you control the narratives around food, you control culture. And soy's been sort of seen as this like supervillain in the global food system. It's been blamed for deforestation. It's become this poster child for genetically modified foods. There are narratives about it having negative health impacts on us. Aileen, can you sort of parse out those narratives for us? How much of it is true and how much of it is just a narrative?
Again, big question. I'll try to answer it.
I'm sorry, I keep tossing you the big
a few
ones,
minutes. But I think, I want to come back to the question of like control and power and narrative. And so I think when we're talking about these foods, they have so much history behind them, and the ownership of who gets to, whether controlling like the actual biological and genetic content, or who gets to frame the narrative, they are so intertwined. And catching something Kristyn just mentioned, the fact that there were 7,000 varieties of soy. Can anyone think of 7,000 of like anything? Like that is a lot. To put it into some context, something that popped into my mind was thinking, if we go into a standard grocery store right now and you go to the apple aisle, this is something I used to think, oh, look, a red apple, a yellow apple, and a green apple, right? 3 apples. And then I remember going for the first time over a decade ago to a farm that had over 200 varieties, and I kind of couldn't perceive of that possibility. And so the fact of certain crops now that start to have this really homogenized narrative, like soy is this supervillain, it's blamed for deforestation, or might be falsely misassociated with having cancerous effects, which I think the science has evolved over time. Medical doctors in the office, feel free to chime in, but I think there's been an evolution of kind of the nutrition data behind that. You have to really question and go deeper into the why and the what. And if we look at a crop in terms of deforestation, I was just talking with my partner at home, and he's like, well, look at something like palm oil. in its own original context, you have crops that might have been grown in ways that were sustainable with their communities. Then you have this voracious global appetite that's fueled by globalization, and suddenly you have deforestation. So I think what's important to remember is we can't blame soy itself. There's so many varieties. The way that it's grown is not soy's fault. It's really about looking at these practices that have become so industrialized. And since I have a 3-year-old, I think about my daughter who consistently asks to just eat one thing. If I let her just keep eating that one thing, she would never stop. So, and I think the same thing, when we look at any crop that is kind of run out of control with soy, we need to break down how it's actually was and can be and is incredibly diverse. The practices and the ways that it can be cultivated can actually be much more balanced than they are today.
Hate the game, not the player.
Yes.
Well, Steve, we were talking about this before the show, but your restaurant isn't explicitly marketed this way, but you get a lot of praise for your food making people feel really healthy and good, and they feel nourished when they walk away from it. And Joodooboo tofu is such a comfort food for us. You get a lot of praise for your food, but what feedback have you gotten about your food that has felt most fulfilling?
I think there are two things. One is the comment that they feel really cared for after having a meal at the shop. The second one is a little bit more specifically Korean related, is to have, whether it's a dish or a banchan or something like that doesn't look like anything familiar or is not something that they'd ever had before, but something tastes or feels very familiar about it, or nostalgic in a way almost. Those two things are personally the most gratifying. Yeah.
And you also shared something fun about your grandmother that I want you to share with the group. The feedback that she gave when or that your mother,
my mom.
Your mother,
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So it took a very long time for my parents to understand what I was trying to do with my life.
That's
that
also
confusion,
true for many of us.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. And that confusion only grew when I told them, "Oh, I'm going to be making Korean American food." They're like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, just like me, Korean American." And their response to that was, "We don't know what that is." And so there came a certain point, I think, when after the shop opened and my parents had come to visit, they sat down, they had a meal, and then a little bit of background before that. So my grandmother, my father's mom, she was sort of a matriarch, spiritual matriarch, and she also was a big health advocate. Whenever she would come to visit her kids, including and grandbabies here in the States from Korea, she would ask my mom, like, where can you go to get fresh joodooboo? And then this is something that was news to me. And then so they would go out, try and find it, and not be able to find it anywhere, and just make do with whatever they could get from the store. And then, so fast forward, when my mom came and had whatever we were making in the shop, she's like, there's something that really reminds me about your grandma here, which wasn't necessarily like an intention that I was at least at the forefront of my mind, but it was something that, I don't know, gave the works a meaning.
Yeah. Sorry, I know I strong-armed you to tell me that story, but I think it's a good one. I'm thinking about the ways that we feel fulfilled and the feedback that we want from our communities, especially when we're trying to tell a certain type of story. I have one more question, and start thinking. We're going to open up to questions for the audience. So if you have one, think of them now. But Kristyn, some people may know this about your background. You were adopted from South Korea by an American family, and now you're doing this work about preserving heritage seeds, going back to the origins of what this food means for culture. How has all this work sort of broadened your own sense of identity? Big question.
I'm married to a therapist, so I feel like fortunate that I'm faced with ideas like this a lot and questions about what I'm projecting onto my plants of my own existential dilemma. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is like an active restoration that I feel like we're just trying to find, and there are so many ways that I feel like talking about plants, like people relate to some part of what they feel like their own experience has been, whether it's being reduced to like a sort of monolithic version of what someone is supposed to be, being underestimated or being falsely maligned. But I mean, I think that for me, it also like informed having both, a foot in both worlds, and I think that I came to grow Korean crops because I felt competent as a farmer and as a grower, but I wasn't familiar with the plants then when I knew them. And I like grew to love them in their own ways, like for what I saw them do on the farm. But I felt like it was like not necessarily a birthright that I would like understand these crops in their wholeness. And so it actually like a lot of my sense of the work that we do is informed by that little sense of outsiderness, actually, of just being like, it prompted me to take like a fairly private internal process of growing those plants and asking for them to help me understand something about myself. But it forced me to go out of my comfort zone because I was like, I need to bring this to the people who know these crops. And I need them to fill in the blanks for me, because if my responsibility to these plants is to make sure people in my community can have access to them and that these plants can sort of grow and evolve in relationship to all of the chaos we're experiencing in terms of climate change, they're going to evolve in so many different ways. And if I don't know what the tether is that like brings all of us together, it could start drifting. And if something stops being legible to like the community I feel like I'm serving, then I would have done a great disservice accidentally. So I felt like actually a lot of the responsibility that I felt like I came to bear was because of knowing they need to be held in like this type of relationship. And there was only so much I could offer, so.
It's beautiful. Great. Questions from the audience. Does anyone have questions for our panelists? Any burning questions about soy, soybean, maybe any other crops? We could talk about other crops too.
Yeah, throw in some bitter melon.
Yeah, some
hot take.
bitter melon. There's a question right here. There's one, Mike. We're going to get you a mic.
Mike?
Yes.
Wow. As everyday people, I think that, I mean, me personally, I feel that in a food industry, we're kind of locked into the preconceived notion that we don't have any choice, that we have to eat what's in front of us. And I'm actually really curious from the four of you, in the spirit of preserving heritage, in the spirit of understanding origin, what would the four of you like to see from everyday people in terms of how can we improve our own dietary habits, our own wellness? Because we have a certain degree of freedom. We do have the power of choice of what we want to buy, what we want to eat, what we want to put in our bodies. So what is it that you guys would want to see?
Yeah, how do we become better consumers of food? How do we make great choices to support sort of the ethos of everything that you all are doing?
I don't know. I mean, we talked about this. I was like, I hope they don't ask this question. like, I hope Cecilia doesn't ask us what everyone can do.
That's great.
Because I think it is challenging. And when you express like the feeling of like, oh, I don't have a choice, like I'm sorry, this might be like the worst thing to say in this context, but sometimes you don't have a choice because there's so many choices being made without our consent and without our even knowledge of the scope of things that are, being decided upon. Like farmers, we don't have full choice of what we want to grow, where we want the seeds to be grown, what type of farming systems we want those seeds to be grown within and reflective of the labor practices of the people that are growing them. So I think it's hard because we look to the marketplace to think about like expressing our choice through like a type of consumerism, but that's kind of part and parcel to like the problem of what's happening now. And I think that the answer is a bigger, weirder wormhole of just like the types of coalitions and ways that we need to activate different levers because I do think it's hard. Like I think there's a serious issue and a bottleneck of actual choice and the illusion of it.
Are there any more questions? I see a hand over there. We have time just for one more.
Oh, okay. How do we support second generation seeds and other seed savers?
How do we do that? Thank you, Tiffany. Well, I think the invitation for everyone here is we do have a lot of, our whole program is meant to just, essentially provide an on-ramp for anybody, regardless of how much or little you have ever considered seed or how it plays a role in your life. So we have a platform called Seed Stewards, and it's just meant to kind of, flank all of our crops in these types of conversations and for farmers to have a pathway to, connect with communities and think about, that collective stewardship. And so that's probably the best way to just get involved. We wanted this platform to be something where we could really think about democratizing all the processes. That someday there is actual choice, not just, the sense of it.
Can I add to that? So Kristyn's just being humble. In addition to Second Generation Seeds as a platform, there's been an incredible campaign to secure permanent land access for Kristyn, for Second Gen, and for all the communities who are so touched by this work. So check out the website. You probably see the link in the bios. This is incredible, and this is a multi-year. Probably till Kristyn, you're an old and gray and just loving this farm that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. So everyone, check it out.
Great. Well, everyone, give it up for our panelists. I hope you didn't hear this, but my stomach just growled, and it's good timing because Steve has prepared some food for us, and we're going to talk about what you've made. So let's go to the demo table.
Okay.
And you'll be able to see the dish, which you'll taste in just a moment. But do you want to start by just telling us what the dish is?
Yes, the dish is officially called Joodooboo with stuff. So let's see. It highlights a couple different versions of soybeans. So this is a little bit of a block of joodooboo that was made earlier this morning. These are an heirloom soybean from Korea. They're referred to as chestnut beans because of their really creamy, kind of sweet texture and flavor. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about this specific one?
No, they're really delicious. Are those the brown chestnut and the scholar?
It's actually just the brown chestnut.
Yeah, everyone we talked to was basically just steam them with rice. We were anything else? And they're no.
Okay.
And then there is, there's some soy. This is basically a relish that I made with some charred chorizo and then some soy sauce. Is basically a take on a Korean all-purpose dipping sauce that utilizes Meyer lemon, scallions, garlic, ginger, a little bit of chili vinegar. And then some spring veggies. We have some sugar snap peas and some young favas that were grilled whole, a little bit of extra virgin olive oil from Sika Hills, and these little green specks are dehydrated celtis, just the leaves that were dehydrated. I just wanted to, there's kind of a lot of sweetness going on, sweetness of the soybeans, the spring peas, and a little bit of sweetness. Oh, there's some meshil, sour plum syrup in this, and just wanted to balance that out with some nice herbaceous bitterness from the olive oil and the celtis leaves themselves. And then anchovy powder and some salt.
Do you make the anchovy powder? Where do you get anchovy?
The anchovy powder was a collaboration with another chef friend. Basically, a big vat of anchovy dashi that was reduced down to just basically this much, dehydrated and then pulverized into powder. So it's kind of a little umami bomb.
Great. And you're going to assemble it for us?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's see you do it.
Okay.
You do this every day.
Yeah, so just a little bit of salt on the joodooboo.
Okay.
Little anchovy powder. Let's see. This is the relish.
You said it's Joodooboo with stuff is the official name.
Joodooboo with stuff.
Is that on your menu? Joodooboo with stuff? No, but you have some version of this dish, right?
All the different components are basically present in the shop, but composed like this, it is not so much.
And how do you
only here for you guys tonight? Right. Special.
Beautiful. Yeah. Does it matter the order of what you place?
A little bit. I guess, so season the Joodooboo first, and then considering the shape of the relish and how it's going to kind of get split up with each scoop, each bite, I like to put that on next, and then however it comes together after that is just dealer's choice.
Okay, dealer's choice. Edible flowers. Right?
Edible flowers.
Edible flowers.
And then it's a little wilted now, but a little symbol of courage.
See, that's beautiful. So you're thinking about the balance of flavors, like with all these different components you put on, you're thinking about how they all sort of complement each other, right? And what's in season. And
yeah, for sure. Just some fun textural contrasts, and then balance of flavors, and then yeah, just sort of how the different flavors interact with each other.
So does a brave audience member want to come up on stage and actually try this dish? You all will get to try it, but does someone want to try it with Steve? Steve, you choose. You choose.
Right over there, the first one.
Right? Yes, Tracy.
This way. You're going to come up this way. Thanks for being brave to choose something in front of an audience. Welcome. Welcome to our food demo. Everyone give it up. First, tell us, what's your name?
My name is Tracy.
Tracy. And have you tried Steve's food before?
I have not.
Okay, so this is your first time.
I've had Eileen's food.
You've had Eileen's food. Okay, well, please enjoy it. Tell me, walk us through, yeah, that's why I said you got to be a little brave to come on here. Tell us your sort of first impressions. What do you notice? What do you smell? What do you taste? Yeah, give it a good sniff.
It smells really fresh.
Fresh.
I'm excited for all the textures and the flavors.
Okay. Well, don't let me keep you. Get into it. And the food...
Perfect for someone with braces.
You can put that on your marketing too. Yeah. And everyone's going to get a chance to try this too.
I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I think I was expecting tofu, but it's not tofu.
It's not the tofu you've normally had.
That's right. Okay. The tofu that I'm not normally have. It's actually really, I think it has its own character and its own flavor profile.
Well, how's it different than other Joodooboo you've had in the past? You mentioned
it's really creamy, and I don't even want to say it's silky. It has a lot of texture. It's creamy texture. And then I love all the different layers of flavors. The beans and the relish, I think you call it, and the vegetables. Yeah, I think that's my favorite part, is all the different textures that come together.
How would you describe the taste of the other ingredients? Is it sweet? He mentioned some sweetness to it. Are they complementary?
It's the best thing about fresh vegetables. It's crunchy and just, I don't know, it has that snap. I mean, it's a snap pea, but...
Putting the snap in snap peas, Tracy.
Yeah, that's why it's named as such. Perfect. Right. Yeah. When you normally eat tofu at home,
I do.
How does it compare?
It's really unique. I don't know how to describe it. It is really unique. There's different tofus with different firmnesses, and I still don't think I've had this level of texture in a tofu.
Yeah.
Like either it's like too soft and silky, or it's like really firm.
Right.
So this is like somewhere in between.
Right. And I remember, Steve, you told me that tofu plays a really good supporting role in how you think about your dishes. Tell me more about that. Like, because sometimes tofu's the star, the main character, but you think about tofu as being a supporting role.
Kind of. I mean, it stands up, it holds its own in a lot of different instances, but I mean, just thinking of putting it in a really flavorful broth, for example, it's delicious, I guess, in its own right, but all the more so because it's playing with the broth and
right.
Yeah.
So now that everyone's sort of, as most people gotten the tofu, it's coming your way if it hasn't reached you yet. Is this some sort of approach to tofu that people could do at home?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
To make the tofu itself?
Could they make their own dooboo with stuff? Like how would they sort of, if they haven't cooked it that way in the past or prepared it that way, what's sort of a good way to start thinking about using tofu as like a supporting role in the way that this dish is really sort of exemplifying?
Yeah, it's sort of it's not a great example, but it's kind of the easiest one. It's sort of like as an analog to what you would want to use like a creamy ricotta or some kind of cheese with. Ricotta with spring vegetables and all that stuff isn't particularly novel or new, but then if you find a tasty block of dooboo, you can use it in similar ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you'll try to replicate this?
Absolutely.
Good. You didn't finish all this. Feel free to finish it.
Being a good Asian by leaving.
For me? For me. Are there thoughts as people are trying the dish? What are people thinking? What do people feel? Thumbs up? I saw some thumbs up.
Cool.
Lots of thumbs up. People are loving it. Great.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Is there anything else you want to share about the dish that maybe we didn't talk about? Anything else? What can people expect when they walk into Joodooboo? If this is sort of their introduction to it.
If this is their introduction, there are, I guess like some representation of seasonal vegetables. Joodooboo the best I'm able to make it. And fun combinations, contrasts.
Yeah.
Delicious sauces.
Delicious sauces, sure. Yeah.
You both have tried a lot of dooboo with stuff before in the past, right? How is this like different than maybe, Kristyn, than other dooboo with stuff you've had? How's Steve?
Oh, it's just clearly better.
It's just clearly better.
It's a cut above. But it is like really, yeah. I mean, when I first tried your dooboo, I was like, oh, I hadn't experienced something that was like quite that same texture, or just like that it was so flavorful unto itself, because I think that's part of the bad rap it gets, is like, oh, it's sort of flavorless and it's just meant to take on like other bigger flavors. But it was like so delicate and nice. And I will say my daughter eats it like just by the block full. It's like a block goes in the mouth and it never leaves. It just like goes until it's gone. Yeah. And it's not like that with other brands, definitely not.
No, definitely not. Only with Steve's.
Only with
Steve's.
Steve's.
I think that's what I meant. It was that it's not like manufactured tofu.
Yeah.
And I think it really does come across where it's like I'm not eating something that has like pressurized and that same consistency, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of things going on that you can tell it's really like handmade in that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for being such a good sport. It's not always polite to talk while you eat, and I made you do it. So thank you for being a good sport about it. Thank you
so much.
Everyone, give
Thanks,
it
Tracy.
up to Tracy. Great. I think we can also start. This is not the only thing you'll eat tonight. You'll also have a wonderful tofu dessert, and I'd love to tell you more about that. And we can sit back down and introduce you to the chef or the person who has prepared that dessert for us. Is everyone enjoying the food? Good. Are there seconds? There's no seconds. No. Okay. So I'm so excited to introduce our next guest to our panel. QT Việt Cafe is some fans in the crowd. QT Việt Cafe is a collective, and it's also a creative cultural hub dedicated to queer and trans Viet liberation through ancestral practices, the arts, and intergenerational connection. And here to represent QT Việt Cafe is Hai Ya. Hai Ya is a second-generation Viet Southeast Asian cook, seed saver, cultural artist, writer, and community organizer. Hai grew up in a Viet immigrant family of gardeners, farmers, and cooks, and also is a member of the Queer and Trans Viet Cafe Collective. Everyone, welcome Hai. So I want to get into the delicious dessert that we're about to try, that you've shared with all of us. But before we do that, tell me more about QT Việt Cafe. It's not an actual like brick and mortar cafe. It's a collective. Tell me what that means.
Yeah, we kind of pop up in the spirit of nomadicness and spirit of our fluidity. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. So grateful to be here and so grateful to see you all. Yeah, my name is Hai and I'm part of the Queer Trans Viet Cafe Collective. I want to give a shout out to our crew. We have Amanda, Amy, Ma, Jeannie, Jessie, and we have a whole crew of us who've been building queer and trans Viet healing. We're really dedicated to ancestral practices, the arts, and intergenerational connection. We heal with our parents and our elders from the intergenerational trauma and war that comes from being diasporic, being queer, being trans, being able to express ourselves fully as queer and trans folks. And to me, so much of our freedom and liberation is connected to being connected to our homeland, being connected to where we come from. And so many of us are not only artists and musicians, poets, writers, but we're gardeners, farmers, seed savers, people who are attempting to connect with homeland, whether that may be here or in Vietnam. And yeah, just so grateful to be steward allies with everyone here on this panel, and also building a community, a network here in the Bay to not only grow our healing as queer and trans Viet folks, but healing as a community in general. So yeah.
And you make really tasty desserts. I got a preview backstage. And of course, we're talking about soy. Tell me about the dish that you've brought to share with everyone.
Okay, so I shouted out our crew. Like they've been like testing and asking family members, and we've been cooking like all week long to prepare. We brought to share Dohee Lee, which translates to. Did I hear like Yes. Yes. Okay. Oh, it gives me, that warms my heart. Yeah. So Dohee translates to tofu, and then Nuc Dong is ginger syrup. So it's essentially soybeans that have been cooked and into soy milk, and then we coagulate it with agar-agar to make into like a soft, creamy, milky tofu pudding with pandan, which is pretty connected. Yes! That's what I'd like to hear! And then we essentially cook down ginger in palm sugar, and then we pour that over this creamy, soft pandan pudding.
So what you're describing reminds me of something I grew up eating in my Chinese household, which is doufu fa. The other people know that too, which is like a sweet tofu in like a gingery sort of sauce or a broth. Yeah. And I usually ate it. It was always sort of like a special occasion, or my mom would only buy it for me on special occasions. But is the dish you're describing, is it enjoyed in a certain way or in a certain kind of tradition?
Yeah, I think that when I think about soy and soybeans, I think about what was shared earlier about like coexistence and co-stewardship, what our Viet lineage knows of soybeans and soy, we're talking like 2,200 years. Like we're talking like 200 BCE. We're talking like a Viet adaptation, a Viet resiliency of thousands of years of colonization. And we've been able to adapt that to do things like jiao, like fermented bean curd, or tương hộp, like fermented bean like grains, into dishes that are really popular. I think especially in the like 200 BCE, like those dishes were really popular in Buddhist temples as a protein alternative into vegetarian cooking. And so growing up, yes, some of my favorite ways to eat it were warm on winter days and cold on hot days. And I think that, I just think about what does it mean to be in the diaspora and be in existence with other traditions, other cultures, and potentially create new rituals and evolve them. So, I think that, for tonight, shout out to Amanda. They created this like what I think we're still figuring out the name of it, but essentially we created like a soy dust. It's essentially like roasted, dried, and then powdered with salt and sugar that will go on top of the syrup.
People are probably like, where is this? You're gonna get it when you leave. Well, like Kristyn. Kristyn, bringing it back to like the different varieties that you talked about, are there certain like varieties of soybean that are specifically used for like sweet dishes? Like how do you sort of understand what is used for what? Because every soybean variety is meant for a certain serve a certain purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly know because someone who's very assertive tells me that that's the case, and so a lot of it, like. We just have like this sort of oral tradition being passed down, and so I think that is the amazing thing of just like having like everybody up here being really concerned with like trying to find the access points for that information and sharing that in the diaspora, because I do think that a lot of that isn't necessarily like just recorded or you can't just find it, and so I think it's just the types of events and things that are being organized by everyone up here is what's really important.
Mm-hmm. I think like tonight's conversation has just felt really uniquely very Bay Area, it's just and I've just have become more immersed in the local Bay Area Asian American food scene, and you kind of quickly realize what a close-knit community this is. Everyone's sort of separated by everyone is connected. And I wonder for all of you on the stage, as you all are pursuing your own missions and philosophies around food, how has being connected to a community in the Bay Area broadened the way you think about your food or your work? It's for anyone. Or does it?
Well, I can start. I mean, even just looking to the audience, a lot of new faces, but also people that I've just had the joy of getting to know over the years, sharing meals, cooking together, being in shared spaces. And I think that's something so beautiful, as you're sharing about Bay Area interconnectedness. Part of why that's really important is I think when we often can see some kinds of social expectations of individualism, like really being scrappy, being by yourself, making it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do it alone, lone wolf kind of mentality. It's such an important reminder through food and through community that we are part of these interconnected and interdependent kind of like food networks. I don't mean that in the TV show way of network, but just really
it's just all about the food network.
It's all about the food network. No, but just really remembering we are, our destiny is woven together through food, and we're living it, we're breathing it, we're sharing it together every day here. And I think it's just an important part of that restorative healing power of food is to remember you're not alone and you don't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And I think from an ecological perspective, we forget that change is like one of the most necessary components to a healthy ecosystem. And I think that sometimes I feel like when we think about culture, it feels like it's something that's fixed and it's something that we like inherit and we preserve, but we don't have a stake in owning it and moving it in different directions. And so I think that that's like kind of connecting with different folks and having the opportunity to live somewhere as diverse as, you know, as California, and to see all the ways that things adapt and change. And I feel like that's the most liberating thing that I've learned from seeds is just we're not meant to stay one thing. And we have to both, like, we have to continually reflect, like, our landscapes. We have to be, like, distinctly of this place, you know, like, we have to be good guests in this place, and we have these responsibilities, but that there's still, like, those imprints. And it's just about, like, layering those stories on top of each other, not just being like, oh, we're departing from a story. Like, it all just kind of keeps, like, an oil painting or something, kind of just building upon it.
Oh, that was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone, let's give it up for our panelists for sharing their stories. Kristyn, Aileen, Steve, and Hai, you're going to enjoy the dessert as soon as you walk out of here. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's just a wonderful way to celebrate storytelling and food and the way that food helps us tell even better stories about our communities and about each other. Also want to give a big shout out to our beautiful performers earlier this evening, Dohee Lee and Jae John. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy that dessert, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia.